afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Spotlight on History. I'm Mary Helen Dellinger, Curator of the Manassas Museum. Thank you for joining us today. I am wearing my Virginia is for History Lovers t-shirt that you too can get at Echoes, our Manassas Museum store. So come on down and visit us if you like this shirt. So today I'm going to share with you two books from our collection. The reason I picked this topic is because 78 years ago, in October 1942, little golden books came on the market for the first time. So for those of you that grew up with those, you might remember them. They were sold in like places like corner markets, drugstores, and things like that, where they were really accessible to a large portion of the population. So those first books marketed for about 25 cents a piece. That's the equivalent to $4 today, and were meant for families that couldn't afford more expensive books. They were a huge hit with American audiences. So the first ones were The Three Little Kittens, The Alphabet from A to Z. Those were some of the first few golden books. And we have one in our collection. This one was published in 1945, and you can see it here. The signature golden spine that would normally be right here is gone because this book has been retaped, unfortunately, and that's probably because it was read so many times and well used. So the inside has an inscription, Lowry Sanders from Kitty A, 1946. So Lowry Sanders was a local resident, lifelong Manassas resident, and we have many things from his estate in our collection. So in this book, you can see Tootle right there. He is a young locomotive who loves to chase butterflies, and he must learn to stay on the tracks no matter what if he wants to achieve his dream of going from New York to Chicago. So you can see the bigger type in here, the simpler words, the great sketches. Here's a great sketch here. Nice color sketches. So these were perfect for young readers. And this book, I think, is appropriate for a young Manassas resident to own since we're considered a railroad town. So here's our little golden book. So I want to switch things up a bit with our second book, and I think this is kind of timely, and you'll see why as we get further along into today's Spotlight on History. The second book I want to share with you today is The Code of Virginia from 1860. So it's hard to see that because the spine is really damaged. This book and other versions like it are a summary of all laws and regulations that are passed by the Virginia General Assembly that are in effect as of the date of publication. So it's not just new laws, it's also things that are already on the books. So there have been 6 different versions of the Code of Virginia, published in 1819, that was the first one, 1849, 1887, 1919, 1950, and the most recent one was 2008. So this particular version was put together as an improvement on the Code of 1849, which is considered to be one of the most thorough revisions ever of Virginia law. The Code of 1849 remained in force for almost 40 years, including during the Civil War, and was used as the first statutory laws of West Virginia when that area of Virginia broke away to form its own state in 1863. So you might wonder why I didn't mention the 1860 version when I listed those dates. This was never officially adopted by the Virginia General Assembly. So they went to all this work to put it together, but they never actually adopted it. But it's still a great snapshot of the laws that were in effect in Virginia at that time that affected Virginians' lives and businesses on the eve of the Civil War. Now, this book is also somewhat of a history book of Virginia and of the United States because it starts off with a summary of how the country was founded. It includes in the front of it the Virginia Bill of Rights, the United States Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Virginia Constitution. Now, the Constitution of the United States, it lists all 12 amendments. There were 12 in force at the time. So why was the 12th Amendment needed is your trivia question, and what was so important about that? And I'll reveal that answer at the end of the talk. So no looking at Google while you're waiting for the answer. See if you remember this from your history lessons. So I want to read a few things to you from this book, which I thought were kind of interesting. I have not read the whole thing. So on this section, section 4, on voting, that each commissioner of the revenue shall annually, in addition to the list of persons subjects of taxation now required by law, list every male white citizen within his district who will at the next ensuing general election for members of the General Assembly or for county, town, or city officers having attained the age of 21 years. So it goes on from there. So you'll notice some of that language. White males, 21 years old. So clearly that's not the case anymore. You can vote when you're 18. Everybody has the right to vote, regardless of race or sex. And that changed at some point. I'm not sure when all of these things went into effect. I didn't go into all of that here. In this section, I thought this one was kind of funny, that the General Assembly, by resolutions unanimously agreed to on the 16th of February, 816, requested, in the name of the state, that the remains of her beloved son George Washington might be removed from the family vault at Mount Vernon and interred near the capital of Virginia, beneath a monument to be erected at the public expense. So it goes on in this passage to also request the body of Martha, his wife, so they could be together. Clearly Mount Vernon said no to that, because if you've ever been to Mount Vernon, you can visit the crypt, and that's where Washington is. A third section, which I thought was also interesting. No Negro emancipated since the first day of May 1806 or hereafter, or claiming his right to freedom under a Negro so emancipated, shall, after being 21 years of age, remain in this state more than 1 year without lawful permission. So clearly, if an enslaved person was free, they would have to leave the state within a year unless they could get permission to stay. And it probably was not easy to get permission to stay. And so that was a big thing then. And the last one, all marriages between a white person and a Negro, and all marriages which are prohibited by law on account of either of the parties having a former wife or husband then living, shall be absolutely void. So this was a marriage law that was actually on Virginia books until June 12th, 1967, when the Supreme Court overturned it in a decision. And if you were familiar with the film Loving, which we screened earlier this year, it talks about this. So this is some of the more interesting, there's lots of cool things in here, if you ever get a hold of one of the copies of these, to go back and read and see what the kind of laws were that were on the books. So I'm going to, before we get to the trivia answer, I'm going to leave you with this. The Code of Virginia is contained in this one volume from 1860, and the 1849 Code was the same. It's a big book. And I read that the Code of Virginia was about 1,000 pages long, so that's about how long this one is. Consider this. The 2008 Code of Virginia is contained in a whopping 29 hardcover volumes with an additional 2-volume subject index. So that's kind of where we are with the laws today. That might be a bit much. Okay, so here's the answer to the question I posed earlier. Passed by Congress on December 9th, 1803, and ratified on June 15th, 1804, the 12th Amendment provided for separate electoral colleges for president and vice president, correcting weaknesses in the earlier electoral system that we had in this country. Now, you all may have been reading and hearing about some of this in the news, so that's why I wanted to kind of bring this to your attention. That controversy was with the presidential election of 1800, and in that year, Jefferson was running against John Adams, and it was an extremely partisan and outright nasty campaign. The two men hated each other, lots of mudslinging, but the campaign did not provide a clear winner due to a constitutional quirk. So at that time, presidential electors were required to vote for 2 people for offices of president and vice president. The individual receiving the highest number of votes became the president, and the person with the second most votes became vice president. So that's how it worked, and unfortunately, Jefferson and his vice presidential running mate, Aaron Burr, both received identical numbers of votes. So the election got thrown to the House of Representatives, as required in the Constitution. So 35 votes were taken over 5 days. The House could not decide what to do until finally one person changed their vote, and Jefferson received a majority. So that was the 36th vote, or the 36th vote in the House. So the 12th Amendment addresses this problem by requiring separate votes now for president and vice president. So before, it was just whoever got the most votes won, and then whoever had the second most votes was the vice president. So that's a little constitutional history for you. So that's all for today. I'm Mary Helen Dellinger, and I'll see you next week.